Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and today I will be showing you how to use and hook up the Horizon Motors total car control system. I have had a few people ask me how to hook this up, and I thought I would make a quick video about how to use it and some other tips that could further help you in successfully using the controller and making your own car. First of all, the requirements for any car using this controller is you need at least a seat, a physics sensor, make sure that the arrows, the big arrow is pointing forward and the small arrow is pointing right. Normally it should spawn in this configuration if you pick it up. You need wheels. Any powered kind works, just make sure that the plus arrow is pointing forward. Suspension is also allowed, but I prefer not to. And you need a type of engine. This can either be modular or all electric. Alright, for this explanation I've gone for a diesel engine, but later on in the video I will also show you what you need to do to have it all electric and as a hybrid configuration. One tip with the diesel engine is that if you're using a alternator instead of a generator, I like to hook the RPS straight up to the clutch pressure so that the alternator is always running. Now another thing you need is a way of turning on your car. This can be either a toggle button or a key button or any on-off value that you want to give it. Now obviously the last requirement is the controller itself. This controller can be found in a workshop and is updated pretty regularly when any changes are made. If any major changes are made, I will make a new video about how to use the controller. But if no new video is available, then you can assume that it is pretty much the same. The latest version of the controller as of this video is version 3.4. Now once you have your basic car, you can start hooking up your required components. To start, we start with the engine, in which case we need to find the engine starter, which goes to the modular engine starter we have here. We have the clutch, which goes to the modular clutch right here. We have the fuel manifolds, which goes obviously to the fuel manifold, and the air manifold, which goes to the air manifold. If you want more power out of your engine, you can also supercharge it by putting a pump onto your air manifold and also onto your fuel manifold, which gives you more power for the same size of engine. Next up is the ignition key. You want to hook this up to the ignition input on the controller and to anything you want running while your engine is on. So that is all of the pumps, for instance this cooling pump. I wanted to run the fan, and if you have any headlights you probably also want to connect it to your headlights. We'll get to those later on. Also, one thing I forgot that you need is of course a battery. Any type of battery works, it doesn't matter. I personally also like to use a breaker. And when I use a breaker, what I do is I connect everything that should always be powered to A, that is the battery, but also the alternator, because this is a thing that charges your battery. And also if you have any doors, I would recommend connecting the pivots and the buttons to power A, because in that case, if your breaker is off, you can still open your doors. Then anything else, I connect to electric B. Now as for the seat, you go into your composite tab, and then you hook seat data up to the seat data of the controller, and then also hook up composite data from the engine cylinder to engine cylinder. And last up, physics sensor to the physics sensor input. There's two other composite inputs. These are non-mandatory, but they will allow you some extra functionality. I will go over those later. Now there's one last thing to hook up, which is the RPS from the crankshaft up to the RPS input of the system. Now it will go forward, but obviously you also want to be able to go left and right, so you need to hook up your steering. In this case you will need an inverter, as your wheels will be pointing in different directions. Most of the time, since I place my wheels from the left side, I know that my left wheel is the wheel that will be inverted. So I will hook the inverter up to the steering, and then hook up steering to the inverter and to the other wheel. And there's also an output for brakes that goes to the variable brake on all of the wheels. As you can hear, I have made a mistake because it isn't starting. And that is probably the exhaust manifold not being present. Tip, don't forget your exhaust manifold. Also a small tip, any RPS pipe can also transport a fluid at the same time. So if you have your engine in your engine bay and you want exhausts at the back, what you can do is have your exhaust also running through the RPS pipe all the way to the back. Just make sure there is no clutch or gearbox in the way, because fluids will not transport through those types of blocks. Now the engine is started, and we can see that my steering is inverted. And that means that I have hooked up the wrong wheel to the inverter. This can be fixed through either switching over the connections or going into your controller and telling it that the steering should be inverted. There you go. Now if you try to drive, you see that the car is standing still. This brings me over to the controls of the car. Basic controls of the car is WS for your gas, your throttle, A and D for steering. If you have lights connected, left and right are your blinkers, and up and down is your gearbox. Anytime you start your car, it starts in neutral, and you need to press the up key to go into first gear. The way I like to make my cars, they by default will start driving, as that is normal for a real car. If you don't press the clutch or don't have it in neutral, your car will drive away. Now that you have made your most basic car, you obviously want some more features added to it. The first feature that it provides is a display. The display that you want to use is either a 1x1 monitor or a 1x3 monitor. When choosing a display, you want to set display type to either 1x3 or 1x1. The selection here will be expanded over time to provide multiple looks of displays and also different sizes. In this case, I like to go with 1x3. Now for hooking up a display, you obviously need to hook the power switch to your ignition key. Need to connect your electric and your video data to the controller's dash monitor. Now if we spawn it in and turn it on, it gives us information about the vehicle. In this case, you see how much RPS you're running, how fast you're going, the gear you're in, and how much fuel you've left. As you can see, it doesn't show I have fuel, and it gives me a warning over here. The warning it gives me, it's telling me that my battery is low. You can hook your fuel up to here. Make sure to connect it to tank content and not tank pressure. I have made this mistake a lot of times. And then connect your battery to here. If you have multiple batteries, it will still work fine, as your batteries will equalize their charge between each other. Now as you can see, when I start it, there's no warnings, and it tells me that I have 37% of fuel. Of course, 37% is not correct, because I have not correctly set the amount of fuel. You can look onto the Stormworks Discord server's frequently asked questions if you want to see how much fuel there is in each container, but I will quickly go over it right now. In any small tanks, you have 31.25 liters of fuel. For medium tanks, you have 187.5 liters of fuel. And in large tanks, you have 703.125 liters of fuel. Of course, for multiple tanks, you need to increase that value to the amount of tanks you have, and use either add gates or a custom microcontroller that's like a really big add gate to add all of the fuels together. In this case, we're using a medium tank, so I have to set it to 178.5. Although personally I like to set it to liters, as this gives me a more accurate display on how much fuel I have left, since it'll simply show me I currently have 140 liters of fuel in the tank. As you can see, it doesn't actually spawn with 187, and that's because the tank is drained into the engine as it spawns. So that is correct. Now as you can see, it has gears. The controller provides a automatic gearbox, a manual gearbox, and also a combination of both. The automatic gearbox will simply gear up according to your RPS, although currently it will not gear as there is no actual gearbox in this car, but it'll still try to gear. With the combined method, you have your manual automatic gearbox, and then you can press up again to go into the manual gears, or you just press up and down to switch gears. Let's add the gearbox. In order to add your gearbox, you need to have at least a space for one gearbox if you want only reverse, 2 gearboxes if you want a 2-speed car, 3 gearboxes if you want up to a 4-speed car, and 4 spaces if you want up to a 6-speed car. If you're using 4 gearboxes, your configuration should be... If you're using 4 gearboxes, you need at least 2 gearboxes pointing towards the engine, 1 gearbox pointing away from the engine, and then the last gearbox doesn't matter. For lower amount of gears, the gearboxes that that go towards the engine are the ones that need to be removed. So for a up to 4-speed car, you need one pointing towards the engine, and then a 2-speed car, you need none pointing toward the engine. Now for the gear ratios, your reverse gearbox needs to be 1 to -1. And then all the other gear ratios are noted on the connections here, which is for the first gearbox that is used in gear 1, 3 and 5, you need 3 to 2. For the second gearbox, you need 5 to 2. And for the last gearbox, you need 9 to 5. Now for these gearboxes, the one pointing away from the engine is gearbox 1. So this needs 3 to 2 on your ratio on. Make sure to use ratio on. Second gearbox needs 5 to 2. And third gearbox needs 9 to 5. Now to hook them up is simply hooking up reverse to the first gearbox, and then 1, 2, and 3. Make sure the gearboxes also have power. Oh, I moved the controller and forgot to merge it back. That is my mistake. Now there we go. As you can hear, anytime we gear now, you can hear the gearbox shifting through the gears. Personally, I also like to add at least one more gearbox pointing away from the engine, as right now it will go way too fast. And most times I put this on 3 to 1. When using gearboxes, by the way, pointing away from the engine with the arrow means you're lowering the gear, which is what I'm doing in this case. And if you would be pointing them towards the engine, you're increasing the ratio. So this one makes it rotate slower, these two makes it rotate faster. And this one, oh, I forgot to put it on off. If you want it, a gear ratio by default, make sure to use ratio off. This one will make it rotate slower by default. As you can see, I can drive away a lot easier without the engine stalling. And my idle speed is a lot slower because of the gearbox that slows me down. But now when I start to drive, the automatic gearbox will gear it up. And I will go to about 180 before I start wheeling, because this vehicle is not heavy enough. Personally, I like to add some weight in the front of the car and the bottom of the car to make sure it stays locked to the ground, because otherwise you will get this. If you still get wheelies, I recommend lowering the gearbox through the method I just noted even more. You can add a second gearbox, do it on the reverse gear, just make sure to slow it down. And as you can see, if we come to a stop, press down once, and again we go into reverse. And now we can reverse up. The controller allows a lot of customizability. First off, you obviously have the display I just talked about. You can either use a 1x3 or 1x1. I will quickly also show off the 1x1 monitor that is available. So as you can see, the 1x1 monitor is a lot more data driven, simply displaying how much RPS you're going, how fast you're going, your gear, and your amount of fuel. You also have the ability to change it here from a diesel to electric to hybrid. Of course, you want to make sure that you select the car type you are making. You have the total amount of fuel. What this changes is the way the percentages are displayed, and it will also give you a fuel warning when your fuel gets under a certain amount. which is also shown through a little icon at the top left. The 1x1 monitor, by the way, does not support the warnings as there is simply no room for them. Then you can here change your gear system. You have a full manual, which you have to gear yourself. It will also not show the drive or M icon. It will simply show 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have auto, which will full auto your gearbox. You are not able to manually override the gearbox. And you have both, which is what I just showed you, where you have you have automatic, and then you can press up again to go into manual. Here you have a slider for your max gear. If you want a car with only 4 gears, you can set this to have your max gear at 4. Then here there is some more customizability to your gearbox. You can set the RPS at which your gearbox will automatically shift up, or it will indicate you to shift up through your instrument panel if you have that. Your upshift RPS in sport mode, which is something I will also get into later. Your downshift RPS, so at which RPS, if it gets below that, it'll downshift. And then downshift RPS sport. Your auto shifting delay in seconds, which is anytime you gear, how much it will wait at minimum until it gears again. This can prevent it from, if it up gears, the RPS will drop, and then it's like, oh hey, my RPS is too low, I will down gear again, and it'll get into an infinite loop. If it does that, try changing this up a bit. That mostly helps. Then you have the RPS of the engine. RPS at throttle 0, which is your idle RPS. RPS at throttle 1, which is your RPS when you're full throttle. And RPS at throttle 1 sport, which is your RPS at full throttle when you're in sport mode. Then you have cruise control steps. Currently, in the current controller, cruise control is disabled. As the controller I use for it, I broke it and it doesn't work at all. But once it works, cruise control steps is once you enable cruise control with the button, it will round it off to either ones where it won't round it off, an even number for 2, increments of 5, so it will only be, for instance, 50, 55, or increments of 10, where it will only be 50, 60, 70, and it'll hold cruise control on those. Then you have the PID settings for the electric motor. If you're using a diesel, it won't do anything, and if you're using an electric motor, I would recommend not touching this. These settings that are in here will most likely be fine, but if you know what you're doing, you can change them. You have electric motor brake, which if you are using an electric motor and you throttle up, it goes to 16 RPS in this case, and you let go. If you have this turned on, it will put on power to slow down the RPS in order to get to the low RPS. If it's off, it will simply not apply any power and just let it slowly spin out. Here you have some RGB settings. These are the colors of the outline of your display, where you have a main and an accent. This is the main color is the very outer color, and if you're using a 1x3, the accent color is the central block. Show blinkers on screen. This, if you have this turned on, it'll show small triangles on your blinkers flashing on your monitor. This works for both 1x3 and 1x1. Engine speed display will simply change your speed display from RPS to RPM. Here you have the settings for the ZE ECU controller. I just recommend not touching this, again, unless you know what you're doing. You also can change your overheat protection. which you can set. I personally like decrease RPS, as that will still keep your engine running, but it will just run it a little slower to make sure that you're not overheating. Invert steering is exactly what it sounds like. If you turn it on, it'll invert your steering. If you turn it off, it won't. You can change the amount of brake that is applied. Of course, higher numbers means more brake, but also more slip. There's a normal brake force and also a brake force when in sport mode. You can have the same in both of them, but you can have them different. Clutch speed is the speed at which the clutch goes back to normal anytime you either gear or change into gear from neutral. If you have problems with very heavy vehicles that have a lot of wheels, anytime you gear, the RPS goes way down and the engine stalls. I would recommend turning down the clutch speed. For race cars, you might want a really fast clutch speed, as you really want to get up in gear really quickly. Here you can change the steering. These are the same settings as the ZTE steering module, where you have your non-linearity, the stabilization sensitivity. If you don't want stabilization, set this to 0. Your max steering and your min steering power. These are the amounts of steering you will get at either your minimum or maximum speed. So you get max steering at max steering speed. In this case, it's set to 40. You get minimum steering at your minimum steering speed, in this case 120. And anything in between, it'll pick the number in between these two. For your night lights, you have the ability to turn them on automatically. Make sure that if you're using the automatic night lights, you have a clock somewhere on your vehicle. And here you can change the times. I would recommend keeping these the same, as these are sunrise and sunfall. Then here you have the cruise control PID settings. Again, the cruise control is disabled, so these won't do anything at all. But once the cruise control is back up, the cruise control settings will go here. Some extra features. You can have another display. This display can be any size you like, but this display will display your GPS. In this case, if you're using it, you want your touch output to GPS touchscreen, and also again, ignition of the key. Your GPS monitor, very simple. It shows where you are on the map, and you can touch the top part of the monitor to zoom out. And you can touch the bottom part of the monitor to zoom in. Oh, one setting I actually forgot is the vehicle name display. In this case, I will, for instance, call it example car. It doesn't matter if you're using capitals or not, as the text system will automatically fully capitalize it. But this is the name displayed at the bottom if you start up your car. Next up is the instrument panels. There is a lot of functionality that you can have on your instrument panels. If you want everything, you need, I think, at least 3 or maybe even 4 instrument panels. I would recommend, if you have any displays, just simply hook the backlight up to ignition. Make sure they have power. And as for composite, what you want is you want to go through all of the instrument panels. So from the first to the second, from the second to the third, and then from the controllers, trailer hitch and instrument panel output to the first, and then from the last one to the instrument panel input. Now you can hover on the in and output to see what kind of controls you have. In this case, as you see, number 1 is sport mode. So let's say I want number 1 here to be sport mode. I will change it to a button, call it sport, for instance. Make sure that it is a toggle button, and I will put it on channel 1. Now I, for instance, want my hazard lights to go under that, so I will go to instrument 3, Again, make that a button. Say hazard lights. Put it to toggle, and it was 3, right? Yeah, 3. 3 for hazard lights. If you have night lights, button 2 will manually turn them on, even though it's not the time for it. Button 4 has to be a push button for the cruise control, but again, cruise control doesn't work. Once it works, that will be the button. And button 5, if you're using a hybrid car, you can press that to go into a full electric eco mode. As for the outputs, not all of these are meant for actual displays. A lot of these are for trailers that you're connecting to, because this will also connect to your trailer hitch, which I will show you later on. But for instance, let's say I want to display the engine temperature right here. So I'll say quickly just temp. I want it to be a dial from I like 0 to 115, as 115 is the value at which your engine will explode. And again, just channel 1. Let's see what else I want. Let's say I want the gear up and gear down indicators. That is, as you can see, 21 and 22. So I will put that to 4 here as gear down. I will make this a indicator light on 21. And then for instance, I want that one, so I want instrument 3 to be an indicator light on 22. And this will be gear up. Now what else do I want? I want to see how much battery I have, for instance. I want to see that on number 1 here. Battery, which was, what was it? 6 bat. So number 6, and that's a simple 0 to 1. Quick explanation of all of these. Engine temp is number 1. Number 2 is your fuel consumption per second. Number 2 is your battery consumption per second. Number 4 is the amount of brake you apply, mostly used in the trailers, as the trailers also brake with your car. Number 5 is compass, which is also used by your trailers if you have trailers that steer with your car. Number 6 is simply your battery, so how much battery do you have left? Number 7 is your current gear. You can put this on, for instance, a 7-segment display if you're not using the monitor. 21 and 22 is your indicators for if you are currently should be gearing up or gearing down. It doesn't do anything for cars with auto gearboxes. 23 and 24 are your blinkers, left and right. 30 is if you currently have your ignition on. 31 is your brake lights. And 32 is your reverse. Anything higher than 20 is an on-off signal. So these are mostly used for your lights or indicator lights, that kind of stuff. Now I will change any not used to none, so we don't have extra dials that do nothing. Now as you can see, we have an engine temperature of 20 degrees, which is slowly going up. You do want to make sure that your cooling is capable of cooling your engine. I will show a quick trick on how to do that later on. Over here you can see that we have one battery that if I page up, you can see that it's about true. It rounds it up, of course. But once our battery starts going down enough, you'll see that go down. Also, make sure you have alternators to power your battery, or use separate generators. I would recommend past the gearboxes that can also power your battery. Now the hazard lights won't really do anything, but it will show you that the on-screen blinkers. Hazard lights are obviously just simply having both blinkers go at the same time. And then right now my RPS is 16, and if I press sport mode, you can see that it goes up to 20. Sport mode also slightly changes how your engines, how your engine runs. I won't go into too much detail on that, but it does change some slight things. Yep, 21 is gear up, so this one is not supposed to be 22, but this one is supposed to be 21. And then this one is supposed to be 22. So as you can see now, if I go into manual, it'll tell me like, hey, you should probably gear up as your RPS is quite high. Because it's a quite light car, it'll want to gear up pretty fast. And it doesn't have a lot of trouble with gearing up. If you're in your max gear, your gear up indicator will not light up because, well, you can't gear up. And the same goes for if you're in gear 1, it won't gear down. It won't tell you to gear down, sorry. Another useful button to have is a way of parking your vehicle. I mostly like to use a toggle button for this. Any toggleable value will be alright. Simply connect this to the parking brake input. If you're in park, your vehicle will also notify you. Your automatic gearbox won't do anything, and you simply can't drive away even if you try anything. Now as for the lighting of the vehicle, practically any lighting that a real car has is available. I personally like to use like custom-made indicator signs, what do you call it? Paintable indicators. That's the word. To make these custom lights that look nice. But you can also choose to use simple light bulbs like these. If you want all of the lights, in the rear you need 4 lights, at least 1 per side, and then the other ones could be central lights or anything. The colors obviously being orange for your blinker lights. Then I like a dark red for my ignition lights. Then a brighter red for my brake lights. And then white for your reverse lights. In the front, you need 3 lights actually, sorry. Which is 2 light bulbs or indicator lights or anything. At least, again, one that needs to go on either side, and then 1 that can go in the center. And then you also need, or not need, but can use spotlights for your night lights, which will give you extra visibility. If you're using night lights, I recommend not putting these too bright, as a straight white is really bright. What I like to use is the darkest gray that the game offers. Then of course you again need orange for your blinkers. And I personally like to use a bit of a lighter gray for indicator lights if I'm using bulbs. And for Paintball indicators just use white, as these are not as bright as the bulbs are. Any type of light that you want to use is available. Of course, you can use indicator lights. You can't use RGB lights. I might make a separate controller that like smartly uses some RGB lights that you can have technically less lights. For instance, what some cars have now is that one of the ignition lights turns off and then turns into a blinker. Something like that. Maybe I'll go into that at some point, but currently you can't use RGB lights. To hook them up, your reverse lights are the same as your gearbox, as you can see here. So those go to your bright white lights. Then you have your brake lights right here. Those are the bright red ones. Your night lights, which are your spotlights. Your left blinker, which are both your front and rear left blinker. Same goes for the right blinker. And then you have a few lights left, which you can't find on the controller because those simply go from the ignition key. Also, I keep forgetting to do that every time. Simply put your default state on your breaker on, because you don't want to go into your hood every time and turn on your breaker. That's simply annoying. So now if I turn on my car, you can see my night lights are on. That's because I currently don't have a clock. I'll put that on in a second. But my ignition lights are on both sides. If I brake, so if I press S, my brake lights turn on. If I go into my blinkers will turn on. If your left blinker is on and you press right, the other blinker will automatically turn off. They also have an automatic turn off where if I stare and if a certain amount of time goes over, if I release my steering, the blinker will automatically turn off, just like real cars. If I turn on my hazard lights, both blinkers will start blinking. And if I go into the reverse gear, the white lights in the rear will turn on. Now, as I said, if you want automatic night lights, you need to have a clock. That's the only thing the clock is for. It doesn't do anything else in the controller. I do like putting it on my dashboard, but if I don't have room, I'll simply put it somewhere in the vehicle. Now, as you can see, if I turn it on, the lights don't turn on. But then if the time of day goes later and later, and as you can see here, they automatically turn on. Then they turn off once it's light again. Controller also has a control for a horn, which you can simply use a simple buzzer. Put this anywhere in your vehicle, doesn't really matter. Of course, also connect power to that and connect it to the horn output. The horn has some car horns. If you go all the way over here, you have horn 1, which is this. Horn 2, which is this. And horn 3, which is this. And you can change the pitch and volume to get the horn you like. For older cars, you can also use the klaxon. It's a funny little horn. I personally like horn 2. And then like change the pitch a bit to get the horn I want. And then now, anytime you press your spacebar, as long as your ignition is on, you get a horn. Oh, of course. Remember to put your input on your trigger. It's your trigger, by the way. I have my triggers at the spacebar. You can have it on your mouse, whatever, but the horn is on trigger, but make sure to put that to push. And now, as you can hear, you can use your horn whenever you press your trigger. Now that's everything you need if you're making a simple diesel car. Go into the settings, play with these, especially the RPS. For instance, for racing cars, you might want a bit of a higher RPS, at least that's what I like. But don't go too high as your engine will overheat. What I mostly go for with my race cars is that the normal non-sport mode doesn't overheat, but using sport mode for too long might overheat if I don't watch out. On that note about overheating, an easy way to test for overheating, at least one that I like, is simply put your sport RPS to a ridiculously high number. Oh, I did the upshift RPS, I am very sorry. Put the RPS at throttle 1 sport, sorry, very ridiculously high. It will sound horrendous and you should not keep it this way. But if you do this, you can rev it really high, and then the engine temperature will begin to climb pretty fast. Just remember that after you're done, put your sport RPS back down if you're using sport mode. If you're not even using sport mode, you can keep it that high because it doesn't really matter. One thing I forgot to mention about the diesel car is that if you're using a tank, make absolutely sure that you're relieving its pressure, because if you're using fuel, especially if you're not pumping, it will happen quite quickly. Your pressure will go down and down, and essentially you'll be pulling a vacuum into the tank, which will make it harder and harder to pull out fuel. To make sure this doesn't happen, you want a gas relief valve and simply some kind of port on the other end of that. Also, obviously, you want a hose anchor somewhere in order to be able to refuel it. Make sure that's obviously not on the other side of the gas relief valve, but on the same pipe system as the tank. Also, again, one thing I forgot to mention is the trailer hitch. The connectors I use on all of my vehicles is the electric connector. This one, electric connector. What you simply do is you put it at the back of your vehicle. You connect the composite data sent to your trailer engine instrument panel output. You connect it to power. And then if you want this warning to go away, you can add either a button to release this thing, or what I sometimes like to do is make a small microcontroller, which is a constant not, which is essentially just an empty output that does literally absolutely nothing and just exists to get rid of these. As electric connectors can also be disconnected by simply grabbing them. But on some vehicles, mainly trucks or other things, it is nice to still have a toggle button to do this. Now, hooking up a trailer is pretty easy. For instance, I will use this generator trailer I have right here. If you are making a trailer, which I will make a small video on later, what you want to always make sure is that your connector is a variable height, just to make sure that on a car your connector can be at any height. It can be done through either just having two wheels and having your trailer be able to point up and down, or just like this one, have it on some hinges. Now what you can do is turn on your engine. back up into the connector. And there you go. As you can see, the trailer will now copy any of the lights that you have on the vehicle. So your brake lights, your reverse lights, your blinkers. And as you can see, I'm now in park mode. You can also see that these wheels are actually not braking. They're not even connected. Okay. On the newer trailer connector, this is a really old trailer. If I were to grab this one, as you can see, it will also brake your vehicle. Now, if all you wanted to do is make a diesel car, this for you is the end of the video, because now I will be going into the all electric. Now, obviously for all electric, you do not need any type of engine or any type of diesel engine, so just completely get rid of that. You can also go gearboxless, but you can also use a gearbox. Personally, I do kind of like having a gearbox, but that's up to you. In terms of motor choice, again, that's completely up to you. I have made a few with just a few small electric motors. I have made one with a medium electric motor. If you're going really big, hell, use a large electric motor. For this example, we'll be going with a medium. Now, if you're going for an electric car, you don't have a way to measure RPS by default. So what you want to do is you want to have a T-piece pipe and then put a torque meter on that T-piece. Make sure that this is before everything, so pretty much just directly out of the motor. You want to measure the RPS, which then goes into your controller, as this will determine at how much throttle you will be running your motor. And now you will connect your motor to the electric motor output. As for power, I personally like to keep this battery kind of a systems battery, and then add a separate battery pack, which most likely will consist of multiple bigger batteries. In this case, I'll just use 3 medium batteries, which are going to use their own breaker, which most of the time I'll, for instance, call this one the main breaker, and then call this one the motor breaker. Turn that on. In terms of electric, you want these ones, of course, to go to the battery, and then this one to any motors you have. What I also like to do is how to charge it. You, of course, need a cable anchor. This thing can go anywhere on your vehicle. I will connect this to a charger. I have 2 ways of connecting this, either through 2 chargers, go into electric in on both of them, and then go to both of the electric A's separately. This will make sure that both the motor batteries and that's the system battery is being charged. And the other way that I like to connect it is by going to the motor battery and then connecting through a single charger the motor battery to the electric in, and then the system battery to the electric out. Both ways are completely fine, and it's mostly up to preference on how you'd like to charge them. With an electric motor, you still want to use a clutch, so you want to get the normal clutch block, not the modular one, and add that after your torque to the RPS. Your clutch is completely fine if it's either before or after your gearboxes. That does not change how the vehicle works. And in terms of connections, just connect this to the same clutch that the modular engine was connected to. Now if you spawn this in and turn it on, I will notice that something's not working. And why is that? Oh, yep. Make sure to tell your controller you're making a electric car. As you can see, it'll still try to run at 5 RPS. Which means that in idle, you will use power. If you don't want this, make sure that your RPS at throttle 0 is set to 0, which means it won't idle. Also, I just talked about the battery. Make sure that you're not connecting to your system battery, but of course your motor battery, because you want to know how much power you have left in terms of driving and not your systems. Now in terms of driving, it's not very different. And again, there was the setting right here that says electric motor brake. If you turn this on and then start up your car, if you now let go of W, as you can see, it will try to go down. It'll flicker a little bit because it's very close to 0 and goes just above it and just below it. Just looking at that, I might actually make the RPS display an absolute number, which makes it unable to get into the negatives. Or maybe not even absolute, maybe I'll just say like, hey, if you go lower than 0, just display 0. Because those numbers are technically not important, as reverse RPS is not really what you want. So that's all I have for electric cars. As you can see, they're not that different from hooking up your diesel cars, because it's the only thing that changes is your engine, and practically anything is fine. Next up, I'll go into the hybrid vehicles. For the hybrid car, again, there's not too much difference, but you will need an extra microcontroller, which I'll also link in the description below, because the clutch control of the diesel engine is a little bit different. At least you don't require it, but it is nice to have it, because if the diesel engine isn't running, but clutch is applied to it, it'll still make the sound as if it were running, which in a hybrid car does kind of destroy the illusion of it running electric. In this case, what I'll do is I'll actually move the gearbox a bit further back, so I have a little bit more wiggle room to work with. So for a diesel, what you want is you need an extra pipe, which in this case will be a simple T-piece right here. And you want a separate clutch, just like the electric vehicles, after your split. On this split, I'll have a quick extra T-piece. And of course, my motor of choice. Because this is hybrid, your motor can actually be a little bit smaller, because it still has the diesel engine to back it up. And then you need a torque meter, because when your diesel engine isn't running, you still want to know how much RPS you're running. So in this case, you don't want the RPS from there. but you want it from there. Electric motor is still the same thing. Just take it from the electric motor input. For the batteries, I will again use the same thing I did with the electric car. I'll use a separate battery pack, add another breaker, make this the motor breaker, and then connect that to these batteries and then to the motor. I'll also give this one its fueling port because I recorded that a bit later, as I forgot to add that to the diesel motor, so I'll add that here as well. Again, with the gas relief valve, very important, because otherwise you will stop a lot earlier than you're hoping to. And then obviously this one also needs a cable anchor, which I'll connect in this case to these batteries, and then with a charger which comes from these batteries to these. In terms of the alternator, you can choose what you do with that yourself, but I do still like to have the system battery be charged by that, because in this case that's the battery that keeps most of it running. In terms of the clutch, the most default type, which I'll do first, you want a constant number for the diesel clutch. And then obviously this clutch, you simply want to hook up to the clutch input. Connect the power to that clutch. Don't forget to tell the car that you're making a hybrid. With hybrids, you can yet again choose to have your throttle at either an idle throttle of like 5 RPS or 0. But as you can hear, you will still always have the diesel engine running. Now, to combat that, on the workshop I have a hybrid clutch module. Which essentially what it does is you give it your starter input, which is... which one was it again? This one. And the input to your fuel manifold. And then put this to the modular clutch. What this essentially does is it detects when your diesel engine should be clutching, so whenever the starter is on or whenever it has a throttle, it will apply clutch to the modular clutch in order to connect it to the rest, of course. So what this does, if I now drive away, you can hear the engine currently helping the electric motor. But then once I get to the RPS, which it currently isn't getting to in time, before I need to turn around. Okay, so what's actually happening in this case is apparently actually a single electric motor is actually not strong enough to keep the RPS going at 16 RPS. So just to show you what I want, I'm just going to lower the total RPS to 14, which is actually an RPS I do use for quite a decent amount of vehicles, as it's a pretty fuel efficient RPS. So as you can hear now, you can hear that there is no diesel engine running, we're just running full electric. But then if I slow down and speed up again, you can hear that the diesel engine will apply power in order to get me up to speed again. And then once I get over that 14 RPS again, there we go. And now it's running just full electric. It should still work practically exactly the same as before, but now it's simply just actually silent. You can also force it into full electric if you enable number 5 on the instrument panel input. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. If you don't want to, don't. It is fine by me, but I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.